Hello, my name is Chandra, and this week I am working on some long fermented sourdough bread. So we have a lot of wheat sensitivities in this family, and I'm guessing that wheat is worse for us than rye or barley because there's more gluten. So the longer bread is fermented, the less gluten is in it. For one of my children, I tried to limit any bread at all, but other people in the family are, and for myself, other people in the family are going to eat bread. So in case it's a time when I can't say no, or I feel like I shouldn't say no because it's not a life or death matter in that moment, we don't have that kind of sensitivity, then I like to make sure I have this very long fermented, like 3 days in the refrigerator bread available, so that when that child that is extra sensitive has some, it is less of a tax on her system. So here I'm making a leaven. My sourdough starter is pretty inactive. I haven't refreshed it in a while. I could tell that there was a level of liquid on the top, the hooch, which is just a sign that it's kind of older. If I use just this starter to make my bread might not rise as high, or will take longer to get to the point where I can start refrigerating and letting it ferment for the long ferment time. And it is 1:30 right now, so I'd like to move it along as quickly as I can. So in here, I'm going to make a leaven. I'm just using 25 grams of starter, 100 grams of rye flour, 100 grams of water. And this is going to become nice and active and bubbly, and it's only going to take a couple hours. I'm going to put it by my wood stove too, so it'll be nice and warm. Okay, so this is going to get a lid on it. I like to just use a plate. I'm going to put this next to my wood stove, and in an hour or two, it will be ready for more ingredients. All right, next, I'm going to get a loaf of gluten-free artisan style sourdough bread going. The recipe I'm going to use, I just got the Loopy Whisk website author's book. This book, Baked to Perfection, and I'm really enjoying making stuff and just reading it more than anything. But she has a recipe for an artisan yeasted bread, and I want to convert that to a sourdough bread, just for fun, really. So I have my gluten-free starter, which is made from brown rice, and I'm gonna pretty much follow the recipe. I might cut the water back just a little bit because there's water in here. I'm going to be winging it a little bit, so we'll see. I debated making, see, this has hooch on the top of it too, just a little liquidy, which is fine. I just usually pour it off. I debated making this bread side by side with the recipe and then a sourdough version, but I think I'm just gonna go right for sourdough. And that would give me an idea of what the hydration, what it should feel like and look like. But I've made gluten-free breads enough, I think, that I kind of know what it should feel like. So I'm gonna go light on the water, and I can always add more. I've just been standing here debating whether I want to add the sugar it calls for. I don't usually add sugar to sourdough breads. Maybe it would give this a boost. I think I'm gonna skip it. So, I am gonna make a note right in my book as far as how much starter I'm using, which is going to be 30. I'm trying to go for 35 grams to make it a nice round number. All right. She calls for 370 grams of water. Assuming this is about half and half, I'm going to reduce the water by 15 grams. I'll use 355 grams of water. Oh gosh. I should not be doing this in here. We want to mix the wet ingredients, which will include the psyllium husk, in the bowl I'm going to rise the bread in. I definitely want to knead this in my mixer, so I'll mix the dry ingredients in here. So we'll do that next. What did I say? 355. This is just warm water. Well, I'm already not following the recipe. I'm supposed to mix this separately. I don't think it's really gonna matter. 15 grams. I know that psyllium husk takes longer to gel if it is right in with all of your flours and everything, because they're also hydrating at the same time, but just a little bit of starter is not going to affect it. There is more water, maybe it won't make as thick of a gel, but we know it's doing its thing. Okay. So now, dry ingredients. Tapioca starch, 125 grams. Brown rice flour. I was lucky today. Everything is already ground. 120 grams. $60 grams of millet flour. $25 grams of buckwheat flour. Salt. Yeah, that's just a little bit more liquidy than usual, but it's gelled. And that's just because of the extra water in there. Xanthan gum. And 5 grams of that. This recipe calls for some apple cider vinegar. I'm going to omit that. The apple cider vinegar's intent is to boost the action of the yeast, but I already have, I'm using sourdough. It's already acidic. It has everything it needs. It just needs to feed on this flour. It doesn't need any boosting. I'm going to leave that out. I like to use a paddle attachment for mixing gluten-free breads because they don't hold together the way a regular gluten-containing bread does, and I think the paddle does a better job of combining everything really thoroughly. That could just be what my mixer is like. A different mixer might work better with the hook, but I like the paddle. I'm I'm going to mix this for a good 5 minutes so it's really thoroughly combined. With a gluten bread, you'd be looking for gluten development. In this case, there's nothing to develop, but we do want it to be incredibly smooth. Once that is really well mixed, I'm going to oil up my bowl, get it in there, and let it sit for the rest of this day, which is its afternoon, and into tomorrow, and I will deal with it in the morning. The next morning, I am going to use some millet flour to dust my countertop, and I'll turn out my really nicely risen gluten-free dough. I'll show you, it's really nice and puffy. It grew quite a bit, which is really good for a gluten-free dough. It doesn't actually expand a whole lot, but it does get a little bit bigger. So I'll turn this out and shape it and then get it into my Benetton basket for its final proof. Now you'll see, and I'll talk about how I let this go all day in its Benetton basket and bake it late at night. I wasn't pleased with the level of puffiness that it was getting. It wasn't doing that much, which, as I said, it doesn't do a whole lot, but it didn't get back to where it was. So, you know, here I'm really knocking out all of the gases, and I think when I make this bread again, I'll be more careful to not remove the gases when I shape it, which is a lot like shaping regular gluten bread. So I'm excited to try that. This still came out really nicely. There was still a lot of nice bubbles in it, but I feel like I could get a taller bread if I left it alone a little bit more in this step. You already saw me shape and get this gluten-free artisan bread proofing for its second time. It rose, it took a long time because it was started right out of the refrigerator and I hadn't used it or fed it in a while. So, but overnight that became beautifully risen and puffy, and now this time around is going a lot quicker. But it's not ready yet. I want it to be just like a jiggly, just like what you look for in regular sourdough bread. So it's getting there, but I want it to be a little bit bigger. So that's going to keep sitting. And then to this, I obviously did not get to it in an hour or two. So it was ready in an hour or two. It was nice and puffy. Now it is over fermented, but that is not going to be a problem in our final bread. So let's get adding flours to this. So first I'm going to add my water. This is right out of the tap, it's not warm. So having colder ingredients, especially in the winter, will extend the process, but that is okay with me. So I'm gonna add, this is 735 grams of water. I'm going to add all but about 100 grams. This I will save to add with the salt. I'm going to autolyse this bread, well, fermentalize, I guess you would say, because there is my starter in there. But I'm not going to add the salt until an hour or two has gone by, and I'll use that water to help work the salt in. .200 grams of milled hard wheat. I did not mill this today, but I keep it in the freezer. And 800 grams of all-purpose flour. Not wanting to really work the dough. I do want it all mixed. So I'm going to stop as soon as I don't see dry flour on the bottom of the bowl. And this is a little bit drier looking because remember I haven't added all of the water in yet. Put a lid on that and let it sit for probably about an hour. I'm not going to make you watch it all, but I do spend a lot of time making sure that salt is really thoroughly mixed in. I'm going to leave this to rest, and then over the next 2 to 3 hours I will do several stretch and folds. I do not do this on any sort of schedule. I just kind of get to it when I think of it, but with a half hour to an hour between each stretch. I do get my hands wet first before I stretch every time so that I don't stick to the bread. And I'll just keep turning the bowl and pulling up the dough until it becomes too tight to work with anymore. The gluten is too activated, and then it's time for it to rest again. I decided on second thought that this bread was getting pretty close to the top of the bowl, that I thought I should give it more room, and boy was I right. This dough was just gorgeous, and it was so full of air, and it was really pleasant to work with. It was one of the most beautiful bread doughs I have ever made. This is the step where when I was doing my gluten-free bread, I really just worked it so hard, knocking all the gases out, and here I am being nice and careful and just giving it a gentle shape. And I'm glad that I made these two breads side by side so that I could really get that illustrated for me, what I was doing differently, and what I can maybe do better next time for my gluten-free bread. So now that that's had just a minute to sit, I am going to get some rice flour into these two bowls, and now I'll turn these over, give them their final shape, and get them fermenting in the refrigerator for what turns out to be 60 hours, which is 2.5 days. I don't worry about giving these a long bench rest after they've been shaped for the final time before they go into their proofing bowl. But I do like to try and let them sit long enough for those seams on the bottom to knit together a little bit, which I think gives a better tension, or holds the tension better when I do transfer it to the bowl. And that works better for the second one, you'll see, than the first. The first I kind of have to stitch it together after I get it into the bowl more than the second one here. I'm labeling these with the date and the time so I know exactly how long they've been in the refrigerator. And I'm not going to put them into plastic bags for their refrigerator proof, and they do dry out on the bottoms, which doesn't really bother me. If you wanted to, and maybe I would do this in the future, just revive that bottom crust by laying a wet towel over it for a few minutes before baking it, and that would totally rehydrate it. So now here is my gluten-free sourdough bread going into the oven. I scored it and I got it into a preheated Dutch oven. I heated my oven to 470 degrees Fahrenheit, and I also put a couple ice cubes between the parchment paper and the cast iron, which I've never tried before, but the recipe suggested it and seemed to work just fine. Now, after 20 minutes, I'm lowering the temperature to 450 and baking for a further 40 minutes. So it's nice and crusty and beautiful. Yeah. Okay, I baked this late last night and I'm dying to see what it looks like inside. Cutting open this bread I made. This is the gluten-free bread. That's actually not bad. I was expecting it to be worse than that. I let it rise all day yesterday and it never got to be as nice of a bouncy texture as I was looking for, but it still looks pretty good inside. Actually, this bread was a huge hit. My daughter, who really can't eat gluten at all right now, loved it. Like, she had some with soup. Everybody else, or my husband and my son, had regular sourdough bread. She and I had this bread, and she, I think, had 2 pieces. She loved it. Didn't say a thing about it being different, which, you know, kids are very astute about differences in their food. I wanted to try it in the classic avocado toast with everything bagel seasoning application. The flavor of this is really nice. Even though it had a very long ferment, I don't think it tastes terribly sour. It's soft, but not gummy. We are at the 60-hour mark and I'm baking off the 2 loaves of sourdough bread, wheat bread. I do want to check the temperature on this just to make sure it's done, because I try not to get my bread crust too crusty, because it makes it hard for some people to eat. I did score one and not the other, so this is the one that was scored. And you'll see the second one is much puffier. It doesn't lose all of its gases upon scoring, but it did have the classic overproofed big empty space under the crust. It was loftier though in the crumb, which I liked. So I think next time I'll do just some really light scoring on these really long fermented breads and see if I can get kind of a combination of the two. Okay, you can see how much taller, this is 60-hour bread. You can see how much taller this one is. This is the scored one. It can't hold its shape, which is good. That means there's not as much gluten in it.